challenges, and our generation is no different. And the topic at hand today, I believe, is one of our biggest challenges in this generation, and how we handle it is really going to matter. And so we're going to take the morning to talk about what does it look like to handle this generation's problem. And let me just kind of help us understand how we've gotten here. We look at life right now and recognize that we are at this weird time in history that is new to us. And some of us thought it was just going to be a phase, but it's actually become a new reality. Right? Where media is driven by algorithms, and algorithms are driven by what you click on, and that takes you down a deeper hole, and these algorithms and media land you and I farther and farther apart depending on whatever issue, whatever research that we are doing. And then as we find ourselves farther apart in these issues, then we get put against the opposite side to discuss these types of issues. Not only are we now divided, and, well, on opposite sides of the discussion, we live in a generation that by stats tells us the facts are the majority and the high majority, usually when you read it, about 80% plus of people are absolutely terrified of confrontation and conflict. Being confronted or having to confront somebody in conflict. So we live in an era that is pushing us toward conflict, and yet we're terrified to be in conflict. And then you add to that recipe the fact that, well, we cancel people. That's the new cultural norm. And then you add to that exhaustion. And most of us are living at a speed of life where we are absolutely exhausted. And you start putting all of these factors together, and you can pretty quickly come to the realization when you take a step back and kind of look in, you go like, oh, this is not going to be a recipe for healthy living. However, I do believe it is a great opportunity for you as a Christian, for us as the church to step in and do something that could be really, really good for you and for the people around you, learning how to handle confrontation and conflict in a healthy way, and actually even invite it into your life so that you can show people that it can be redemptive if done the right way. And Jesus models a way for us to do that. That's going to be the conversation that we have this morning. We're going to be in Galatians chapter 2. As you turn in Galatians chapter 2, it's page 1075, and the Bible's there in front of you. As you look at Galatians chapter 2, I'm going to scroll us through the totality of Galatians for just a second, because there's some things happening here that I don't know if when you read through Galatians all the way that they caught your eye, but they started catching my eye, and I was like, oh, we need to do some digging here. Let's listen to some of the language throughout Galatians. Paul says right off the bat, chapter 1, verse 6, I am astonished that you so quickly are deserting the gospel of Christ. Here in chapter 2, you heard it last week. You're going to hear it again today. I opposed him, Peter, to his face. Next week, you're going to hear right off the bat in Galatians chapter 3, verse 1, oh, you foolish Galatians. As we get into chapter 4, you're going to hear, I am afraid I may have labored over you in vain. I want you to think about that one for just a second. Somebody who cares deeply about you, who's been invested in you and wants what's best for you, coming up to you and saying, I'm not quite sure if I wasted my time with you. How does that sit? That should grab our attention. Like, what's going on in this case? He says this in verse 20 of chapter 4, I'm perplexed about you. I'm astonished. You're foolish. I may have wasted my time. I am perplexed about what's going on. Chapter 4, verse 7 and 12 say this, you were running so well, like you were doing so good. And then he writes, but I wish those who unsettled you would emasculate themselves. Let that image run in your brain for just a second. I wish you were cut off. do you start to get the picture that Paul is really unsettled about what is going on in his time in history? And that there's some things that need to be confronted. There's some conflict to be had here, and we're going to have to figure out exactly what to do with that. I want to just kind of give you maybe some tension in our time that might, well, it's not an exact one-for-one here, but it's an emotional one-for-one. Here's what's happening. Jake brought it up last week about how we've been entrusted with the gospel, and that oftentimes when we find ourselves in hardship, we go to what is easier rather than what is actually good for us to be matured and to grow into the gospel, rather than trying to expand the gospel, allowing the gospel to actually transform us, which is how Galatians is all set up in the study that we're in. But as we look at this space and what's going on right here, let me just help you understand that there's the Jews and there's the Gentiles. And I'm not suggesting the Jews are a political party in our time, so they're both Republican and Democrat. You pick, right? But as a Jew, it would be like saying, I am Republican or I am Democrat, and then looking to the opposite party line and saying, and they are the opposite. They are Republican or they are Democrat. And well, in order to make any progress in this world, they need to be like me in order to move forward in the ways of the Lord. That's what the Jews are doing to the Gentiles. They're backing away from, no, it's Jesus only. We fix our eyes on Jesus, and that's how we discuss moral issues. That's how we discuss progress and maturity. We don't worry about titles. We care about people. You feel the tension that's going on here when all of a sudden we start taking the minors, which, yes, they have major implications, don't get me wrong. But when you put them in context of God's sovereign power over the whole world and all of the nations and all of humanity and all of history, it's only the gospel that can do anything with that. And we're over here majoring in a minor, and Paul and the Gospels are telling us, why don't we major in the major? Rather than letting these minor things divide us and distract us and all of that, he's saying, whoa, you guys might be missing it. There's conflict to be had. And it doesn't mean that he doesn't care about the social and political and the educational and the economic issues of his time. He's just saying, have we got distracted in what's leading the conversation in these things? And he wants to bring us back to the gospel. He wants to remind us. Well, he's reminding Peter and the other people in Galatia of this. I want to remind us of this. We're often over here chanting politics while personally allowing screens to raise our children and our grandchildren. Do you see the disconnect? Do you see the easy pathway? Like, it's really easy to make this minor thing the major. Like, oh, if we just change all of that, then, well, it's going to be better. What happens if we don't change what's right in front of us? Like what we're actually responsible for. Now, that's what Paul wants us to kind of look at and think through. And so this morning, as we look at this, I want us to know that because the truth of the gospel is at stake for us as Christians, we as faithful Christians must courageously confront hypocrisy. We've got to courageously confront hypocrisy. We've got to humbly receive correction. And we have to lead others toward restoration rather than division. I want to take us into Galatians chapter 2, verses 11 through 14. You've been there on your phone where you're scrolling, and as you're scrolling, something catches your eye, and so you have to scroll back up to find what caught your eye, and then when you do it, you double click on it, and it takes you into a broader conversation. You're like, oh yeah, that's why it caught my eye. Well, as we're scrolling through Galatians, verses 11 through 14 caught our eye, should have caught our eye, does catch our eye. We scroll back to it. Now let's double click on it. What's the conversation to be had? You heard this last week. I want you to hear it again. But when Cephas, Peter, came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. For before certain men came from James, he was eating with the Gentiles, but when they came, he drew back and separated himself, fearing the circumcision, that is the Jewish party, and the rest of the Jews acted hypocritically along with him, so that even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. But when I saw their conduct was not in step with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas, Peter, before them all, if you, though a Jew, live like a Gentile and not like a Jew, how can you force the Gentiles to live like Jews? As we double click on this little portion within Galatians, you're going to notice three really important characters that will always show up in moments of confrontation and conflict. And so I want to learn from all three. All right, there's Paul, the one who addresses, who confronts. There is Peter, the one who is being confronted. And then there is Barnabas. I call him like the hidden character in the conversation. And so let's start with clicking on Paul, the one who was confronted. Do you see right here why he confronted and how he confronted? In verse 11, it says, I opposed him to his face. This is of the utmost importance if you and I want to do well in our generation, specifically to confrontation and conflict. Notice how Paul addresses him to his face. He doesn't talk about him. He doesn't talk around him. He doesn't stab him in the back. He goes eye to eye, man to man. Proximity in conflict and confrontation matters, and Paul addresses Peter to his face. Now notice, there's a lot of preference going on in the book of Galatians. I just brought you some tension of our own political preferences, just as one example of many examples that I could have brought up in our time in history of how divided we have become because of pursuits that have been amplified by big tech and, honestly, selfish desires among our flesh. But as Paul does this, he doesn't go to the preference stuff. He goes to the heartbeat of what's going on. Look at verse 11 there. He opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. He was in the wrong. Every one of us has been in the wrong. We will be in the wrong. And Paul addresses that because he recognizes that when somebody's in the wrong, you have a responsibility to do something with that. But what was wrong about Peter? Was it his heritage? Was it his political persuasion? Was it his way of handling his money? Like, what was it? Well, look at verse 14. Their conduct was not in step with the truth of the gospel. That's what we Christians are here to discuss and talk about and have conflict and confrontation over. What does the gospel say? What does the life of Jesus and the practices of Jesus reveal? That's what is worth having conflict and confrontation over. The rest of it is just minor stuff. And we don't mix the minors with the majors because we don't want people to miss out on the major. And so Paul, the one who's confronting, he opposes him to his face, but he doesn't talk around the peripheral issues. He goes straight to, this is what the truth of the gospel is, and this is how your life is not in alignment with it. Can we have a conversation about that? If you were to flip over to Galatians chapter 6, verse 1, I think that you should write in your Bibles next to 2:11 through 14, this verse, because this is at the heartbeat of how we handle these things. He says, brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of, underline this, gentleness. Keep watch over yourself, lest you too be tempted. Do you notice what Paul says here? He says, if any one of you is caught in transgressions. If you were here in January, we talked a lot about sin. Do you remember when we were talking about sin in January? How one of the forms of sin is called transgressions, and we encounter that word, that sinful word transgressions, right here in this text. And when someone is stepping over the boundaries that God has designed for them, that the gospel has for them, that they would flourish and people would flourish. You who are spiritual leaders, which is those of us who say yes to Jesus and follow Jesus, we have a responsibility, even if we hate confrontation and conflict, even if we're terrified of it, even if it makes our stomach hurt and our heart pound out of our chest, we have to grow the spiritual muscle of learning how to go confront that. Because people's spiritual lives are at stake here. And so we do that because it matters. But I want you to note something else there. Did you notice the warning? Keep watch over yourself, lest you too be tempted. Be careful, specifically in our culture right now. Have you noticed that when we fight, the way we fight is the opposite or the exact way of the person that we're opposing? We get mad at people for belittling and barraging people, and then as we go to confront them, we belittle and barrage them. Right? Like the way the world handles this becomes the way we Christians shout back, and that ought not be what Paul is saying. Be careful that when you're fighting world problems, you don't fight like the world. And he cautions us because he knows when confrontation and conflict are inside of us, it makes us anxious and our emotions get involved. And he says, if you're not careful, you will fall into the same traps of those whom need to be confronted. I want you to know that Paul doesn't make this stuff up. Paul's not just flying by the seat of his pants as he walks in here to confront Peter and the church. Paul has learned this from Jesus. He's learned how to do this from the person of Jesus and the works of Jesus. Paul would know Matthew chapter 18. If you want to flip over there in your Bibles, that's where we're going to go for just a second. We're going to be in Matthew 18 because Paul would have learned from Jesus what it means to be God-honoring, Jesus-following, and Spirit-filled when we confront people. And if you go to Matthew chapter 18, you're going to notice the heart in why we would pursue something that is so difficult in our time in history. The heart is we care about lost people. We don't want sheep getting devoured. And so in verse 12 and 14 of Matthew chapter 18, it says, what do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99 on the mountain and go in search of the one that went astray? And if he finds it, truly I say to you, he rejoices over it more over the one than the 99 that never went astray. So it is not the will of my Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. The reason you and I would courageously learn how to confront and live well and dwell well in a redemptive way within confrontation and conflict is because we care about lost people. So we have to develop some habits. Look at the habits in verses 15 through 20. You'll see it up on the screen. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. But if he does not listen to you, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen to even the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Again I say to you, if 2 of you agree on earth about anything they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am among them. Did you hear where Jesus dwells? Where God's presence shows up? Where the Spirit flourishes? Where Christian people go with the gospel to do it God's way. God will show up for us when we do it the way Jesus did it. So how did Jesus do it? If you look at this, when you and I are thinking about confrontation and conflict, it starts just like Paul started it. Face to face, person to person, eye to eye. Not around people, not behind people, not over people. It starts face to face. We privately confront people and say, hey, this doesn't look well in your life. Can we learn? Can we talk? Can we grow through this? If that doesn't work, it says take one or two people with you. This isn't about attacking somebody. This isn't about ambushing somebody. Matter of fact, the one or two people should be people that have that person's best interest in mind, that they know, they're trusted voices. We take people alongside to say, hey, I'm seeing this in you, and you may be able to write me off, but I just want you to know that there are other people that see you heading down a destructive path. And this is how we care for people. We come alongside of them with other people that care about them and say, can we help you? Can we walk alongside of you in this? And it says, well, if they don't listen to that, then you need to tell the church. Let me make this clear. This isn't about bringing people up on stage in this context and saying, hey, this is my friend. They don't like you anymore. That's not what this is talking about. When it says bring them before the church, think small group. Think people that you share life with, that you gather with to talk about truth and life and the things. This is about going to your small group and saying, hey, have you noticed that this couple is no longer living in a way that honors the Lord? We've tried to confront them, we've tried to talk to them, and they're not listening because this is redemptive here. It says if they don't respond, then you have to treat them like they're not Christians. And that may seem harsh, but it's real. Right? If somebody says they're a Christian, but they're not taking the truth of the gospel and following it in a design that Jesus models for us, then they don't really believe that Jesus is the saving king. They may want him as Savior, but we're not interested in him as Lord, the one that's leading us. And so we have to recognize that they're not claiming lordship with Christ. It also reveals the fact that, hey, guess what? They're not being led by the Spirit. The Spirit's not alive in them. They're choosing the ways of the flesh rather than the Spirit to walk in this season of their life. The hearts, the habits, making sure that you and I make it known quickly. How do we handle conflict? How do we do it wisely? How do we do it right? Can I remind you this Dallas Willard quote we've used the last 2 weeks? Because right here is what we're talking about in this showing up. The gospel is less about how to get into the kingdom of heaven after you die and more about how to live in the kingdom of heaven before you die. When you confront people in conflict, they should have a feeling among them is like, wow, I had no clue what I was doing and was wrong. Or I knew it was absolutely wrong. I was just waiting for somebody to come rescue me. They ought to taste heaven when you and I confront them or conflict with them. There's not just the heart, it's not just the habits, it's the hope. I want you to see in Matthew chapter 18, verse 21 through 22, right after this conversation, Peter says these things. Then Peter came up and said to him, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Peter says, as many as 7 times. 7 times in the scriptures is a perfect number. So I want you to catch something here. Peter's actually being really spiritual and saying like, hey, out of my flesh, I'm going to throw out, I should do it 7 times. I think that that's like good spiritual response. And Jesus looks at Peter's spiritual flesh response and replies, Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, your definition of how often you ought to do this. He says to him 77 times. You need to amplify it and see it on God's scale. I think that this is really, really important as you and I recognize confrontation and conflict. It's not going away. You better get used to how to walk through it with grace and truth and more grace and forgiveness and less offense if you want to weather well as a Christian in a world of conflict. This leads us right into Peter. Peter had that conversation with Jesus, and now we get to the place in the text where it says, Peter needed confronted. If you go back to Galatians chapter 2, Peter knows he stands condemned. He knows he stands in the wrong. Why is it? Look at verse 12 and 13. Look at what Peter did. He drew back. He separated himself. He started to fear people. He started acting hypocritical. All of these are language that we would use today called quiet quitting. As a Christian who has been entrusted with the greatest news in all of the world and is responsible for sharing that with others and living alongside of them, Peter has decided as a spiritual leader to just kind of quiet quit. And that quiet quit has led to canceling. And I want to ask you this as we reflect a little bit on the Peter component of this. Do you have people in your life that you trust and have given permission to confront you? Have you talked to your small group openly and honestly about, hey, if you see error in my life, would you be so bold as to step up and let me know that you see me walking down a path that isn't healthy? And then have you committed to those people in your life that when they do confront you, you're not going to cancel them? You're actually going to look them back in the eyes and say, I don't like what you just told me. But will you walk with me as we figure this out? And you don't stop working with those people in your life until you've come to a healthy resolve in what they confronted you on. I just want to ask you, do you have that in your life? Peter had that in his life. Paul was that. You know that by the life trajectory of Peter. Peter didn't stop being a spiritual leader. This is a pivotal moment in Peter's life where he gets confronted because he was doing it well, but he got sidetracked, and we all do. Peter gets confronted. Can I just caution you and help you pre-decide some things? In a culture where we cancel easily, can I tell you, you can't cancel or you shouldn't cancel the Lord. Sometimes when things get tough, we just decide, well, that's God's fault. And we cancel the Lord. And one of the ways that we cancel the Lord, you'll see it in your life, is you cancel His word. His word says one thing, and you're like, I can't mean that for me. Or it can't mean that in our time in history. And one of the ways we cancel the Lord is we cancel His word. Can I tell you to pre-decide, you don't cancel the Lord and you don't cancel His word. You grow through the Lord with His word. You don't cancel it. Can I caution you not to cancel the church? Jesus' church. If you want to cancel Madison Park, cancel us. I would encourage you not to, but there are other really, really great churches around. So if it's not us, then go find a church, but don't cancel Jesus' church. Jesus set His church up so that we would learn how to mature by being among people. Don't cancel Jesus' church. And if you are journeying with a people in a small group, can I encourage you not to cancel your small group? When they confront you, when they try to come alongside of you and tell you that there's something going on in your life, don't cancel them. I want to get to this third character, Barnabas. Did you notice in the text? Barnabas, in verse 13 there, it says, Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. Do you remember who Barnabas is? Barnabas is known as the son of encouragement. When Barnabas walks in the room, the energy rises. Barnabas is the eternal optimist. Barnabas is the guy that's like, hey, everything's against us, let's go. And in this moment, all of that has been sucked out of Barnabas. He's exhausted to the place of just recognizing like, well, if Peter can't do it, why should I even try? And I just want you to know, I know we're exhausted. I know conflict and confrontation weigh heavy on us, specifically when it's personal to us. But we cannot not handle confrontation and conflict God's way, because much is at stake. There's a lot of hidden casualties that are the Barnabases in our world. Can I just tell you, some of them are your children and your grandchildren. They're watching how you handle the confrontation and the conflict. Can I tell you, it's the wrestling Christians. It's the people that are gathered with us right next to you right now that are kind of like, man, I'm tired. Does Jesus actually work? And when they watch another Christian sitting next to them give up on it, they go like, I guess I'll follow them too. The wrestling Christian is at stake here, and certainly the lost person is at stake. When they see Christians fighting the same way the world fights, then they say, well, Jesus must not really have power to transform people's lives. There's a lot of Barnabases among us. Maybe you are one of them right now, where you're weary, you're tired, you've been led astray by the world and Christians acting like the world. Can I caution us that we need to learn from Peter? We need to learn from Paul. We need to learn from Barnabas, because every one of us at some time in our past or sometime moving into our future will be able to identify with each of the three of them. People needing to be bold in the way we confront, people needing to be confronted, and people needing to figure out how we were led astray while other people were conflicting over things. I want to walk away with a few things this morning, a couple practical realities. One of the game changers in my life that has changed the trajectory of the way I handle conflict and confrontation is the dinner table. And some of you need to reintroduce the dinner table back to your house. You haven't sat around the dinner table and had supper with the people that you say you love and that God has called you to invest in and steward. You have been eating dinner in the living room. And we have exchanged the dinner table for screens. And then we wonder why we can't have healthy confrontation and conflict. Can I just tell you, one of the greatest gifts that I've ever practically been given was the dinner table. And many of us need to go back to the dinner table. When I was growing up, I don't know what strategy my parents knew, but my parents did this, and it was an incredible gift to us. We sat at the dinner table, and I had two working parents, very busy. We were in all the extracurriculars and all of that type of stuff, but we made time as often as possible to gather around the dinner table. And when we were gathered around the dinner table, you know what my parents did? They busted out the newspaper, and they busted out their work. And they busted out our neighborhood and our community and our church. And oftentimes, because of confidentiality, they didn't give a name and a face, but they gave realities. And they said, hey guys, did you hear about what was happening? And they would run down issues, and then they would go around the table and they would say, how would you handle that? What would you do in that situation? And we would start conflicting back and forth and learning how to problem solve in our heads. And then my dad or my mom would say, hey, based on the conversation that we've been having, how do you think Jesus would handle that? Did your way align with how Jesus would handle that? How would you go back and do it Jesus' way? And then we would dialogue that. And if this sounds super spiritual and way over your league of handling, it was a 20-minute conversation while we were eating. They were just the right questions. And over time, it taught us how to confront and deal with conflict. And I think every one of us, some of you don't have young children anymore. You need to get back to a dinner table with people who you can have these conversations with, going out on double dates, going and taking your grandkids out. One of the greatest gifts I think we gave my parents is we taught them how the next generation was thinking. And so when they went back to work and back to the social spaces, they could better live out among people who thought differently than they thought. We need to get back to the dinner table. And at the dinner table, we need to get back to having conversations that matter. We need to quit being so scared of conflict and confrontation and invite it in a healthy space around our table with people we trust. Can I tell you one more thing that changed the way I handled conflict? I had a mentor growing up. I'm really glad he did this for me in high school. He came to me and said, Tyler, critique is a gift. It won't always feel that way. He said, if somebody is so bold to come up to you and criticize you and critique you, you ought to receive it as a gift because it was hard for them to do. And he said, rarely when somebody critiques you and criticizes you, will they do so well because it's hard to do. So don't expect the gift of criticism or critique to come nicely wrapped in wrapping paper and a bow. Expect it to come wrapped in toilet paper. But don't see it any less as a gift. And then take the gift they gave you and go discern it with trusted people in your life and say, hey, this person said this about me or some of the things I'm doing. Do you think I should take 90% of what they said or 10% of what they say? But I'm taking something because they gave me a gift. I believe we have to invite critique into our life. And we have to thank people when they're bold enough to give it to us. And then we have to act on it so they know that they should do it again if they see us out of line in our lives. I just want to know, will we be a church that does these types of things? I want to double click on Paul opposing Peter and Barnabas being led astray, because I believe we have an opportune time right now to step up and do something in our community, in our society that is countercultural and redemptive. And the way Christians should handle conflict can be just that. But it all starts with prayer. This morning, as we end our service, we're going to stand up and sing here in just a second. There's going to be trusted voices around the room that you're going to be able to go and pray with. They'll pray over you. They'll pray for you. Maybe there's somebody in your life that you need to step up in your spiritual leadership and go confront. You love them and you've been watching them walk in transgressions beyond spiritual flourishing, and you need the boldness to go confront them. We want to pray over that. Maybe you need to be prayerful of putting pride aside, and you have people in your life that have been telling you you're out of bounds, and you've been stiff-arming them and resisting them, and you need to be more like Peter and say, man, it's not fun to receive critique, but I could actually flourish and grow and do something kingdom-oriented if I would listen. Or maybe you're Barnabas, and you're just exhausted with all the conflict and confrontation that's been going on in our society over the past half a decade, and you've just kind of been led astray, and you're floundering, and you're like, whoa, I forgot the truth of the gospel, and I forgot why I'm here and what I'm here for. We want to take these moments, whether it's at stations or whether it's right here in your midst, for you to pray, God, renew my passion for the truth of the gospel. And help me in the way that we handle this generation's crisis, an inability to healthily handle confrontation and conflict. Help us be a people who are God-honoring, Jesus-following, and Spirit-filled. Let's stand together as we pursue that.